All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for taking some time to join us today. For those of you not familiar with the NHL Coaches Association, we represent all 200 coaches in the NHL and support them day to day with everything non-hockey. So everything from their health benefits to pension plans, green card immigration issues, salary and contract support, etc. Beyond that, though, our association has the objective to help in the development of hockey coaches at all levels of the game and to generally help grow the game of hockey globally. So the purpose of today's webinar is a pilot mentorship and continuing education program that we would like to expand upon next season. We hope that the content is useful to you and unique in a sense that it's not typical information that you'd receive at another coaching conference. So to that point, we would really appreciate your guys' feedback at the end of the webinar to ensure that we're providing information that's relevant and useful to you as a coach and supports you in your development. Just a couple of quick housekeeping items before I turn it over to Blash. So the format of today's webinar is set up so that he will spend about 30 minutes or so walking through a presentation, and then the second half hour, we will open it up to questions. You'll see that there's a Q&A pop-up at the bottom of your screen, so you can use that to submit questions even anonymously at any point throughout the webinar. And you'll also see that there's a button called Raise Your Hand, and that will allow me to unmute your line when we get to the Q&A period so that you could ask a question live on the line if you choose. That is enough from me, so I'm going to turn it over to Jeff, who's going to walk you through his coaching career in more detail. Just wanted to quickly note that the reason we selected him specifically for this pilot program with USHL coaches is because of the time that he spent coaching that league with the Indiana Ice, during which in his first season they won the Clark Cup. So Jeff, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Lindsay. Appreciate the opportunity to be on this morning. Obviously, the USHL is a league that has meant a lot to me, not only coaching the league, but recruiting from the league when I was a college coach. And some of you are real good friends of mine. I know most of you. So I hope, as Lindsay said, some of what I say today and just kind of going through my journey is relevant and useful. I hope you can glean some of what I talk about and can apply it to your own situations. I thought I'd start just by walking quickly through my coaching path, and I'm going to touch on a few of these areas as we go through the presentation. But to start, I was a college player from 1994 to 98 at Ferris State. I like to say I got a head start on coaching because I was a bad goalie, and so as soon as I was done playing at Ferris, I got right into coaching. And so from 98 to 02, I was an assistant coach at Ferris. And from there, I went to Miami from 02 to 08. I was an assistant coach. Went to be the head coach of the Indiana Ice, as Lindsay mentioned, and I'm going to come back to that in a minute. For 2 years, was the head coach of Western Michigan. For 1 year, was the assistant coach in Detroit. For 1 year, head coach in Grand Rapids for 3. And now this is my 5th year as the head coach of the Detroit Red Wings. When I was at Miami, I had spent 10 years as an assistant coach at that point, and I was really ready at that point to have an opportunity to be a head coach. I wanted that challenge. It was something that was just inside me, and I really wanted that challenge. And at the time in college hockey, there wasn't tons of movement. There wasn't tons of coaches at that time hadn't really moved into pro hockey much. Not many coaches got fired. There just wasn't much movement, much opportunity. So one of the areas, one of the leagues I looked at for potential head coaching jobs was the USHL. And as I said, I played in the USHL for the Des Moines Buccaneers. I had recruited lots out of the USHL, and it was a job that I had really looked at as a potential. I remember I was at Miami as an assistant in that last year, and I woke up after a year was over, and I was watching the NHL network, and I was actually the playoffs were going on, and I remember it was the first time I'd ever said to myself, I'd like to coach in that league. And I only say that because it was really the first time I ever thought about being out of college hockey. And so I looked at some potential opportunities, and one of the people who contacted me was this gentleman, Paul Scott. And I bring up his, before I even talk, I want to make sure I say Paul is a very, very good friend of mine. Paul's a great man. He's been very important to me and my family and my career. But as I sat at Miami at that time, I would say Paul had just an okay reputation as an owner. He would be an owner, I guess, that would have been considered really involved. Was maybe over involved at times. Had fired a couple coaches over the course of the years that he had owned the team, and some of which maybe, as from the outside looking in, I thought didn't necessarily deserve to be fired. And so he had called me and asked me if I wanted the head coaching job in Indy, and I said no. And then he called me again and asked me again, and I said no. And I think I ended up saying no 4 times. And on that 4th time, I remember I got off the phone, I said no, and it didn't sit right with me. Basically, at that time, fear was taking over a little bit. I had a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, and I said no a little bit because I was afraid to take that chance. And I ended up calling him back and saying, you know what, Paul, I want the job. And he said, you know what, Jeff, too late. I've already given it to another person. And I got off that phone and I had big time remorse. I had big time remorse that I hadn't decided to take the chance and take the job. And he ended up calling me back about 12 hours later and said, Jeff, probably 24 hours later, Jeff, if you want the job, it's yours. And the guy who had taken the job had actually come into Indy. He didn't like the contract, didn't like the look of it. That was part of the risk involved in taking the job. And so he had walked away. And he said, I got to know, I need to know in about 3 hours. And so I turned around and ended up calling him back and saying, I'll take the job. So now the next morning is the USHL draft. And so I had to get up in the morning, and I'm going to make the drive from Oxford, Ohio to Indy, which is about 2 hours. And I get up and I'm in the shower, and I'm dry heaving in the shower. I get out of the shower, I'm sweating, and I'm thinking, what in God's name did I just do? I had this nice life at Miami. Again, my kids were young. 2 of my kids were born. They were young, and I had a nice life. And I'm going, what did I just do? But the reason that I took the job, and the point of it is, although it was a chance, in my mind, it was a smart chance. And it was a smart chance because of both the pictures that you see on the screen. Jim Palafito, who I just is to the left on the screen, was our head scout. And I took the job because I knew Jim Palafito was going to go out and get us great players. I knew he was great at what he did. Him and I had a relationship. And when you really boiled it down, I knew that he would go out and get the number one thing you need as a coach, and that's really good players. And I also knew, for some of the reputation Paul had, he also had resources and was willing to spend those resources on winning and cared a bunch about winning. And in the end, you'd rather work for somebody that cares about winning and is willing to spend the resources, even if at times they're involved, than not. And so although it was a chance, it was a smart chance, and ultimately was the best decision I ever made in my career, and has really laid the groundwork for anything I've done in my career. When I got the job, the first 2 calls I made were to these 2 gentlemen. And I picked these pictures out on purpose because I think they show the fiery demeanor and the competitiveness that P.K. O'Hanley and Mark Carlson have. And I called them, had differing relationships with both guys. I had known both for a long time, but I called them to say, can you give me help? And, what about housing parents? What about curfews? What about how do you handle drinking? How do you handle those types of situations? And not only did they answer my calls, but they welcomed me with open arms and they helped me. And I want to make a point of this to all of you, because I think it's critical. You coach in the best league of its kind in the world. The USHL is the best of its kind in the world, but it's become that on the backs of great coaches that have come before all of us. From the Bob Fergusons who coached me in Des Moines, the Frank Serratoris who built Omaha, the Dave Sicilianos, the Mike Hastings, the Steve Johnsons, Dave Haxtell, Bob Motzko. I can go on and on. And the reason the league is great is, in my opinion, is because of the great coaches that have been there and the great coaches that are there today. You know, I had a conversation with Seth Appert at the National Team Development Program and Eric Rude last night, actually, and we were just talking about how good the coaching is in the USHL today. But the league, the one thing that always struck me in the league is we helped each other. We helped each other because we knew that by helping each other, we were going to stay the best league of its kind in the world. We were going to stay a great league. And if we only did our own thing, we were never going to be as good as we can be. And the league doesn't have to always be great. It'll only always be great if the coaches make it great. And I just think it's really important that we all remember that, and that we all help each other out, so that in the end, you're working from a position of strength. And I'll say, I've been part of the NHL Coaches Association for 9 years. I started as an assistant, then the head coach in the American League. I was still a part of it, and then as the head coach in the NHL. And in the most competitive league in the world, we're as strong and as unified as ever. And a lot of that has to do with the work of Mike Hirschfeld and Lindsay, who's on the call. But a lot of it has to do with the fact that we decided as a coaching group, and I watched it evolve, we decided to help each other out. And we decided that although we're going to compete like crazy against each other, we got to look after each other. And I just think it was an important piece that I wanted to make sure I shared with all of you. This next slide speaks to something I think is real important. And that's not to be in a race. Experience matters. You have to be over-prepared for your next challenge. And I think sometimes in coaching, and some of it's nobody's fault, you know, like my ascension at one point happened really fast. And honestly, if I could have slowed it down, I would have. I've said lots, if I could have spent, you know, a couple more years as an assistant or a couple more years as the head coach, I would have done it. And I just think it's important that you're not in a race to get to the next level. But I think the bigger piece that's really, really, really important is that you build your foundational beliefs at lower levels. And I say that, and I included the picture of the two gentlemen here for a reason. These are the two people that I've worked for in the National Hockey League. Ken Holland is going to be a Hall of Famer because of the work he's done as a GM. Steve Yzerman is a Hall of Famer and would be also on the work he's done as a GM and will do as a GM. When I got the job in Indy, when the game was over, I'd go upstairs to our little coaching room at the fairgrounds, and I'd have to have a conversation with one person, Paul Scott. And I might have to explain to him why I had the lines the way they were. I might have to explain to him why I called timeout in the situation when I did. But it was just one person. And early in our time together, it was established that certainly, you know, through my experience, he respected any of those decisions I made. And at that point, those were easy conversations. When I got the job at Western Michigan, I had to go in after games and I had to talk to one person. I had to talk to Kathy Beauregard. And she was a great boss. She's a great woman. She's an excellent athletic director. She would be the first to tell you she doesn't know hockey. She knows it from the peripheral, but she wasn't a hockey player. She wasn't a hockey coach. She never once asked me why I had these line combinations. She never once asked me why we were doing this D zone. All she cared about was that we were running a good program and we were doing it right. When I got the job in Grand Rapids in the American League, Detroit was a playoff team still. there was lots of people around after games. There was lots of Ken Holland would come down. Jim Nill was my GM at the time. He'd come down. And then when he moved to Dallas, Ryan Martin would. Lots of development people. But in the end, they didn't really care about necessarily wins and losses. It was something. What they really cared about was the development of the young players, and you'd have to have some conversations. There is nothing like the external pressure in the National Hockey League. And I think it's critical that you build those foundational beliefs so that when you walk in the room after games and you're talking to Ken Holland or you're talking to Steve Yzerman, you know that they've got experiences that you might not have. You know they're easily as smart a hockey person as you. And so you have to 100% have foundational beliefs that you believe in for two reasons. Number one, so that when those external pressures get high, and they're going to get super high, that you can hold on and stay strong on what you believe. You know the how you want to play D zone. You know when you want to call timeout. You know if there's an icing on a 6-on-5, whether or not you want to call timeout. You know all those things because you've been through so many experiences. You know what you believe in. Because if you don't, you will fold to the external pressures. The other reason that it's super important that you have those foundational beliefs built is so that you're comfortable enough in your own skin that you can listen to the advice of two great hockey people like I have on the screen. You can listen to Steve Yzerman, you can listen to Ken Holland, and you can accept that advice because you're comfortable enough to accept it. And I just think it's really critical. So the more experiences you go through, the better you're going to be prepared for the challenges you meet. It's something that's super important. I thought I'd spend a minute because I've been through lots of decisions in terms of choosing jobs. And I've also had lots of conversations with different coaches on the paths they take. And so I just wanted to go through some things that have been important to me as I've gone through my different decisions over the years. And so just the major factors in job decisions. The one thing I talk about all the time is, what do you want to do tomorrow? Like when people call me, I say and are asking, should I do this or should I do this? What's best for my career? And I always say, first off, personal's personal. So you got to decide with your family what's best for your family. But in terms of professional decisions, the one thing that's very true in coaching is there is no roadmap. There is no path that's the same for everybody. Everybody kind of goes through it at different rates. And there's no easy, it's not like the corporate world where if you do this and then you do this and then you do this, you'll become the president of the company. There's no way to predict what the path is for you. So I always say to people all the time, what do you want to do tomorrow? What are you going to love doing? If you don't love doing what you're doing, you won't have the passion that you need to be great at it. And so I think it's the single most important question. If you're taking a job and you're not super excited about it, there's no chance you should take the job. If you're doing it just for a stepping stone to the next level or to the next job, you won't be good enough at it if you don't love it. It's too hard. We have a term in the NHL, enjoy the grind. Enjoy the grind. Well, if you don't enjoy the grind, there's no chance you're going to be good at it. So what do you want to do tomorrow? Will I grow? I'm going to talk about this in a minute. Hands-on experience versus learning for others. Expectations versus resources. And I think this is really, really critical. Like success in coaching, a lot of times has to do with timing. And I was real fortunate through lots of my career to be in situations where the timing was right. And part of that timing is understanding what the expectations are and do the resources match those expectations. Are you put in a position where if you do a really good job, you're going to win a lot? There are some jobs where I don't care how good a job you do, you won't win. And what does win mean? Win means meet the expectations. Win means win to a level more than what you're expected to. And what are the resources? The resources might be the players you have available to you. The resources might be, if you're in college, how you can recruit. The resources might be, and some of you would understand this, certainly in the USHL, you have money enough to send a scouting staff out. All those types of things. At the end of the day, if you don't have good enough players, I don't care how good a coach you are, you will not win enough. So you have to make sure that the expectations meet the resources. It's critical in your job decisions, and timing is a factor in that. Am I prepared for the challenge? I talked about that a lot. And then again, what do you want to do tomorrow? What's going to get you excited? So I talked a little bit about, I went through quickly my path, but I want to touch on a couple different decisions I made. One is the decision to go from Ferris State to Miami. So again, for 4 years, I was a player at Ferris. For 4 years, I was an assistant at Ferris. I spent 8 years of my life at Ferris State, and the reason I chose to go to Ferris State over some other schools is because I wanted to build it into a winner. And the best chance we had actually was when I got done playing, because I wasn't good enough. But I knew in that, as we moved towards that 8th year, that I actually thought, boy, we have a chance to be really good the next year. And so it was a really, really hard decision to leave, because I didn't want to leave until that job was done. But amongst other reasons for choosing the job at Miami, one of the reasons I chose was because I wanted to expand my coaching horizon. All I knew about coaching was from Ferris. And I had great mentors there, and Bob Daniels and Drew Pham, like great mentors, great people. Jamie Russell I worked with for a year. But that's all I knew. And I wanted to expand my horizon. So I made the decision, amongst other reasons, to go to Miami, and it was a great decision. I talked about my decision to go to Indy. From Indy to Western, the only thing I'd say with that is when I went to Indy, I really had made a decision. I really wanted to coach in pro, and I wanted to coach in the National Hockey League. And going to college at that time wasn't necessarily the path, but what I spoke of earlier, I also felt when that Western job opened, I always had an eye on that job, because I thought that the expectations and resources were such that I could go in there, and if I did a good job, we'd win at a level beyond what they had won at before. And I just felt that it was a really, really good job. So I ended up getting that job, which I was fortunate enough to get. And it was a year that I thought I was going to spend 10, and it ended up being 1. I got a call out of nowhere from Mike Babcock to be the assistant in Detroit. And I thought once I went to Western, I was going to be there 10 years. This call came up, and I said, you know what? I did not want to leave at all, but I also felt like it was my end of the National Hockey League, so I left. I spent the year as an assistant in Detroit, and it wasn't the easiest year I had in coaching. It was a hard year. I had to get accustomed to the NHL. I had lots to learn, but by the end of the year, I felt like I had really learned, and I was really ready to do a good job. And I was sitting in my basement, and I got a call from Ken Holland and said the American League job had opened. Kurt Frazier had gone to Dallas to be an assistant. Are you interested? And I walked upstairs. I talked to 3 people. I walked upstairs and talked to my wife and said, I've got a chance to coach the Grand Rapids team. And she said, you got to be effing kidding me. We had already just moved our 3 young kids twice in 2 years. Are you for real? Then I called John Cooper, who coached in Green Bay and is now the coach in Tampa, and at the time was in Syracuse. And he said to me, Blash, 100% take it, 100%. You got a better chance of making a name for yourself than you do being an assistant. And then I called Babs, and Babs said to me, kind of hemmed and hawed. Finally, I said, if I was your buddy, what would you do? And he said, well, I'd take it for sure. And that goes to the heading of this section where it says work for yourself or work for the best. It is advice I got a long time ago in taking jobs. You either go make a name for yourself or you go learn from the very best in the industry. And in the end, that move to Grand Rapids was a great move. And then I obviously taking the job at Detroit was a no-brainer. Just as we move through, I just want to touch on a couple things that I think is real important, especially that I've learned through the years. And that's, I think as coaches, we're super eager to grow. We're super eager to evolve. But I think it's important that you don't lose your foundation and you keep it simple. And I had an NFL coach. I spent some time with some different people, and I had an NFL coach say to me, fundamentals win, not schemes and systems. And he said, it's not the X's and O's, it's the players making plays due to great fundamentals. And if you think about the NFL, like that's a start and stop league. It's a league where schemes matter way more than hockey. We're in a fluid game where it's impossible to tell guys exactly where to stand. And so that's something that's really stuck with me. It's I think is really important. And as you move up, if you get the opportunity to coach in the NHL, it's critically important. It's not schemes or systems. It's fundamentals that make the difference. And I think it's important to build those foundational beliefs, to revisit them after each year, and to document them every year. And the reason why I would document them every year is because then you can look back and say, how have I changed, and is it for the better? And I'll give you an example. When I was coaching in Indy, we would, on our tracking, we would track the puck with our forwards hard as we can. And that's all we would do. Our D-men would read off our forwards, we'd track the puck. I did that at Western. When I came to Detroit, I learned from Babs this soft lock that he used, and it was I never used it before. It was with your F3 soft lock. Basically, you had your ass on the other player's hands. You kept the puck out of the middle of the ice, and you soft locked. And so I learned that. So now I kind of changed to that. And then I coached a world championship team with Rand Pecknold. And he talked about the squeeze, which is the defenseman sliding and ending the play before your defensive blue line. And so then we kind of incorporated that. And we used to have under Babs on the soft lock, if you didn't end the play before the blue line, now your D-men stayed inside and you rode the drivers and the forward tracked the puck. And my point is, when all those things, as I was evolving and growing and learning new things, it actually, in my opinion, hurt our track rules because it became too confusing. It wasn't simple enough. And what I've done over the last year is had to simplify it to make sure that it's easy for our players, that it makes sense, that there's only one decision maybe they have to make instead of 3 decisions they have to make. And it was only out of trying to get better. But in the end, sometimes you make yourself worse. How do I grow? And I just want to touch on this quickly. Like lots of us go to coaching clinics. I actually think our coaching clinic with the NHL Coaches Association under the direction of Mike Hirschfeld and Lindsay has gotten way better. But one of the reasons I think that coaching clinic's really good is because we have the small, where we get together with one NHL coach and it's in a small room and you can really interact. And I just think the more you can do in smaller groups where you can share things with each other is really important. Derek Lalonde, who's coached in Green Bay, that's now an assistant with Tampa. One thing he does all the time, man, he's on the phone all the time in the summer, getting ideas from people. I like to say it's because he's not smart enough to come up with his own, but getting ideas from people and learning things and doing those things. And it's a great way to grow for sure. I think when you have the opportunity to work national teams, I think it's a great way to grow because it's hands-on experience. I worked a team with Mark Carlson, and I was the assistant. He was the head coach. And Mark always had an unreal power play. I'm sure he still does. And he had an unreal power play for years and years and years. And I got to be on the ice with him and see how he taught it. And that's way different than the years I spent scouting I got to see the intricacies, the details of how we taught it. And one of the first games that I coached when we got back was against the Cedar Rapids Rough Riders. And sure as can be, I had implemented Mark Carlson's power play. And I think we scored 2 goals on that power play that game. And he looked at me like, what in God's name? So maybe sharing isn't a great idea. Maybe go back to that unified thing and saying that's not great. But it's one of the best ways I think to learn. Certainly summer research projects. We do tons of them. I'm sure you all do tons of them. And all that stuff's great. But I think this point's really important. Don't change to change. Curious minds can muddy the waters. Change because you're struggling in an area. Don't just change to change. I think it actually can hurt you at times. Stick to what you believe in unless you need to make a change. With that said, and I think this is really important in the NHL, there's nothing that's bulletproof. I had a coach tell me once that my set breakout was bulletproof. And I said, bulletproof? And he said, yeah, bulletproof. I said, no chance. There's nothing that works all the time in the National Hockey League. Nothing. It's the best players in the world. It's great coaches every night. You will have to make some adjustments to what you do. And it comes back to the beginning point. Fundamentals win, not your scheme. So you won't scheme your way to the NHL. You better teach great fundamentals. The last point on this is just the reason I have keep it simple on there is you never get to practice in the NHL ever. So if you have to train your players through tons of reps all the time in practice to do all the different systems you have, you won't get to do it. So you better figure out the 2 or 3 things that are the most important to you because those are the ones that you're going to be able to practice. And the other things, you better keep it real simple so they can do them without practice, and you can teach on video and do it that way. A couple of last 2 slides here I just want to talk about, and then we'll get into the questions. The number 1 job you have as a coach is people management. By far and away, it's the number 1 job. All the other stuff is secondary, and I don't care what level you coach at. People management's the most important thing. I've always been a huge believer that how do you get respect if you don't respect other people? So treat them with respect, and they will respect you. I also got this advice when I was young, and it was professional first, personal second. And I do think in our world today, we're taught lots to it's relationships. And I think relationships are critical. But you're going to have to be really hard on people at times. And if it's all buddy and you go out for that first practice and you blow it down and you just start tearing them a stripe, they're going to think, what happened to my buddy that we're hanging out together with? So I think it's really important that it's professional first and personal second. The other part that I think is important is your job is to get the most out of your players. I've said this lots to our coaches, like, we've had a hard year. I could come in every night and just bitch about our players and do that, but I'll bitch my way right out of a job. Like, it's our job to get the most out of our guys. You have to be realistic about what you have, but you got to go in every day with solutions, be solution-based, and understand that bitching gets you nowhere. Like, we were players too, and coaches used to bitch about us. So you better make sure you take the approach that my job is to ultimately the product that you see is a reflection of me, and my job to get the most out of the guys. I want to touch on this point specifically with the USHL. Work environment's critical, and that's for everybody. Like, what company is successful where the employees hate going to work? It doesn't work that way. People have to come to the rink, and they want to come to the rink. I didn't do as much of this in the USHL as I did in the American League, but in the American League, I worked hard at ping pong tournaments. We had a cooking contest where we got a sponsor from a restaurant, and the players went and the young players went and they learned how to cook in teams of 2, and then we all got together one night and we had a cooking, and we had a couple of judges, and it was just fun ways to be a team. And I think that's real. But the other thing that's real important in the USHL, and it's true in the American League too, is your players have to want to play for you and your organization and your team at the end of the year. I can't tell you the number of times I would talk to recruits when I was a college coach who would say to me, we're playing in the USHL, and they'd say to me, I can't wait to get to Miami. And I'd say to them, hold on. Like, make sure you love your time in the spot you're at. And it's really easy, as a lot of you know, if those players don't love playing for you at the end of the year, their bags are packed. Like, if you get down 1-0 or 2-0 in the playoffs, they're done. They're going to the next stop. So create that environment where players love playing for you and love playing for your organization. I want to championship standard. I think most of you know that. Like the one thing I'd say with standards is the accountability is critical, that you have immediate consequences, and it's probably no different than raising your kids. As soon as the mistakes are made, or that the standard, I should say, not the mistakes, that's wrong. As soon as the standards aren't met, have the immediate consequence. So for me, let's say we talked about turning pucks over. If you turn a puck over, whistle blows and the whole team does sideboards. And you do it for 2 minutes or 1 minute, whatever it is, but it's that immediate consequence. It's right away. Babs used to say to me that the media timeouts are critically important in games, because when they make mistakes, you can set them from one media timeout to the other media timeout. And you're not keeping them out of games. And you're not saying, remember that play last week. You're saying immediate consequence, and you change habits with immediate consequence. Babs used to talk to me. He had a coach that he coached with that said, when he was a player, they never made me do it right. And I always thought that was important. Like, make them do it right. Make them do it right. Make them play the way that's going to earn trust in the future, and they will thank you for sure later. And just my last slide here, and then we'll open it up to questions, is a couple pieces on the people management. And one is communication. I've always been somebody that's super direct, super honest, try never to sugarcoat, but I've also been a believer that you don't attack people personally. And the reason I say that, and I try really hard never to use sarcasm. And the reason I say that is, if you want your message to be heard, you want your message to get across, the minute you attack them personally, they're not listening anymore. They're thinking, screw you. And so if you want your message to be heard, just be direct and honest without being sarcastic, and you'll get that message across clear to them. The other part about coach to player communication I think is important is development. And I wanted to share this with you because I didn't really think about this in the USHL, but as I've moved through into the American League especially, I learned this. And that's, when you get players in the American League, it's the same as USHL. They got to get better at 100 things. But they're not going to get better at 100 things. You're going to end up confusing them by saying, okay, you got to get better at this, and this. That's not, they're actually going to bog down. So Yuri Fisher said to me once, make them get better at one thing. Make them get better and figure out what the fire starter is. What's the one thing for that player that's going to start their engine, that's going to make everything else better? What's the fire starter? What's that one thing? And so I've moved to that. And it might be one or two, but like a player, for example, Anthony Mantha. He's a really good player for us. I could break down his video and show him 100 different things he might do wrong and do right. But we've focused on moving his feet. When he moves his feet, he's a great player. The rest of it takes care of itself. So we've showed him clips of when he's moved his feet, and we showed him clips of when he doesn't move his feet. And that's, and honestly, we went through a period of time, that's all we showed, was just that one thing. And it's hard sometimes as a coach, because you want to show them all these other mistakes, or you want to show them all these other things. But you got to make sure you keep it super narrow focused on that one fire starter. The other part is just coach to team. The one thing I like to say lots is teach the players black and white and allow them to work through the gray. Hockey is not a static sport. It's a fluid sport. And so you can never tell them exactly everything that's going to happen. They have to work through the gray, but teach them in black and white. And so for that, you need exact examples. And it doesn't mean positive or negative. It just means exact examples. When you show, if you're going to show a reinforcement clip of doing it right, it's an exact example. If you're going to show them a clip of doing it wrong, make it an exact example. If you have a screen, well, in this play I do this, and in this play I do this, and in this play I do this, they're not going to be able to learn from that. If you show them, this is our principle. This principle has to be followed. Then they can work through the gray of the fluidity of the game. And I walk out of every meeting and I say to our coaches, did I provide clarity or did I confuse them? And you can do either. Sometimes you provide clarity, sometimes you confuse them. make sure your meetings provide clarity. Make sure they're concise, make sure they're to the point, and make sure they provide clarity. So those are some things that, have been important through my career, and some things that are real important to me and my beliefs as a coach. And what we'll do now is we'll open it up to any questions that we have.
Thanks, Blash. That was awesome. Just a reminder, guys, you can use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to submit a question, even anonymously, or use the raise your hand button. There were a few questions that were emailed in when people registered. So I'll just take a sec and kind of go through those as people watching submit them. So, and a lot of these actually you kind of touched on already. So I'll ask them, and then maybe you can just elaborate a bit further. The first one was, how do you feel an assistant coach can best assist the head coach both on and off the ice?
One would be being honest, and two would be being loyal. And those things are really important. Like, as an assistant, you have to make sure you're telling the coach what you think. You're telling the head coach what you think, not what he wants to hear. You have to be okay with disagreeing with them. You have to be okay with those things. But you also have to understand that, one, he's the boss, and so whenever he makes his final decision, and every coach is a little bit different in how they gather information, but when he makes his final decision, you have to support that decision, and you can never, ever, ever leave any chinks in the armor of your coaching staff. So you can never let a player know, I didn't really like this, but that's what he wants to do. All a player needs is a little sliver of an excuse, and they will explode that. So you got to make sure that you're really good in your honesty, but you also got to make sure that you remain extremely loyal.
Okay, awesome. This one actually kind of continues a bit further on that one. So how do you deal with star players at the NHL level?
The same way you guys do. And every level has great players. Every level has good players, and every level has, average or bad players. And it's just the reality of the relativity of the league. Certainly, the one thing in the NHL that is probably a little different than in a unique challenge is that the players have at times almost more ownership. Not more ownership, but they have more skin in the game than maybe a player in the USHL or a player in college, in a sense of their contract, in a sense of that they're going to probably in a lot of cases outlast you. That's just the reality of the league. And so you got to respect the fact that their position in the league, but you also have to make sure that you don't change your accountability. You don't change your approach with them. In the end, they want to be, in building your relationship, you make sure they understand that they have to be held super accountable just for your whole team. Like they have to know that they're going to be great examples of that. And I think when you build that part of the relationship up, they understand it. But there's definitely a unique challenge in it.
Okay. What resources, tools, or techniques that you've had through your progression after the USHL did you wish you had at your disposal when you were back in the USHL? So tools, techniques, resources.
I think as you go through, we prepare to a level now that sometimes I wonder if we don't do too much, but anything, obviously part of it's just the advancement of hockey. So like statistical analysis is way bigger now than it was when I coached in the USHL, but it wasn't as big then in the NHL either. It's just, I think it's been as time's moved on. And I think that creates its own challenges. It's really important to try to glean through which ones help and which ones hurt in terms of stats. But I would say that's one area that I think you can help yourself with, is just making sure, like decisions like when to pull the goalie. That's always been a feel or gut decision. But really, there is statistical analysis that can help you make those decisions more clear. And so I think if you can utilize that, and we all have access to it if we have enough money. There's certainly companies that will give you studies. There's companies that will do those things, that can really help in that part of your decision making. I would say I didn't use video as heavy in the USHL as I do now. But I would say that's probably been the advancement in coaching too, not just from one level to the next. Most of our meetings now are all video based, where back when I coached in the USHL, it was probably a lot of whiteboard based and drawing things on the whiteboard and drawing stuff like that. Video can be tricky. As I said, you got to be real specific with your examples. You got to be real specific with how you want to teach it, but it can be a powerful tool. But again, it might be a tool that at times is overused. But those would be a couple areas. Statistical analysis for sure is one area that's certainly gotten way bigger.
Okay. Can you give a few examples of your foundational beliefs?
Yeah, that's a good question. When I got the job in Indy, one of the first calls I made to people outside of the USHL was to Joe Sean. And Joe Sean's now the head coach at Michigan Tech. And I grew up in Sault Ste. Marie. Joe Sean's a Sault Ste. Marie guy. And my brother actually played for Joe. Joe was an assistant on one of our midget teams. So I knew Joe fairly well. And I always thought his junior teams exceeded expectations. And I was just curious to how. And so I called him, and one of the things he talked about to me was the importance of angles. And as I've grown as a coach, and it's funny because I've had to kind of look at my own beliefs and say, okay, what do I really believe in? Like, we've had to change lots of things here in Detroit because we haven't won enough. And it's been good and bad. We've changed too much, but it's allowed me to see a lot of different things, and almost has allowed me to go back to some of what I believed in when I was in Indy. And when I talked to Joe, he talked tons about angles and making sure that you force people from good ice into bad ice. And as I've gone through coaching over the last number of years from a defensive perspective, at the end of the day, you have to do a really good job of keeping people out of the good ice inside the dots and forcing them to the bad ice. And if you do that all night long, you're not giving up any good chances. It's the reality of it. You might give up a decent amount of shots. Excuse me. You might give up those types of things, but you're not giving up a whole bunch of good chances. So that's been one area that I've worked hard at throughout my career of making sure that we're a great angling team, that we're a great team at pushing people to the outside, that we're a great team of not giving up those real chances in the scoring areas.
I was going to say, hopefully you have a bottle of water close by. Okay, so what attributes do you feel are the separating factors for player success as you climb the levels of the league?
Sorry, ask that again.
What attributes do you feel are some separating factors for player success as you climb the levels of the different leagues? Mm-hmm. So I guess from the USHL or minors up through the NHL, what are the attributes that players really need to have?
Yep, sorry. I actually, this one's great. And I get to spend lots of time with Seth Appert, who's one of my best friends, who coaches the national team development program in your league. And him and I talk about this lots. At the end of if players, the quickest way to play in the National Hockey League, the quickest way to play as players move up levels is to earn the coach's trust. It's the number one way to get ice time. Once you get ice time, now you can show off your skill. So players have to do all those little things great. They have to make sure they stop on pucks. They have to make sure they stop on people. They have to make sure that they don't, what I call poke and hope, that they play from the defensive side of the puck. They play through bodies. They have to make sure that if they're forwards, they're great on wall play, that the pucks are so much of the game, the pucks comes up the wall, that you're great on wall play, and you can make those little plays in those areas to get pucks out or to get pucks into your teammates' hands. They have to make sure that their defensive habits and tracking are great. The more they do that, the quicker they play, period. When players come up to play for me, if they're not good at those things, they're not going to, unless they're elite talent, they're not going to end up playing at all. So they don't get a chance. They get sent down fast as can be. So they have to be really good at all those little things, all those winning habits as they move up. And that's where I said, make your players do it right and they'll thank you later. If you teach your players, if you demand from your players that they stop on pucks, if you demand on your players that they don't poke and hope, if you demand that your players get pucks out on the wall, if you demand those things, they're going to go to the next level and they're going to be way better. Doesn't mean you don't work on skill development. Doesn't mean you don't work on one-time pucks. Doesn't mean you don't do those things. You have to increase their skill level, but they have to do all those things that earn the coach's trust in order to get the ice time to utilize that skill.
Okay, perfect. We'll just ask a couple more that have come in. What's your most favorable way of teaching? Or have you found what's the best way to get your systems and corrections through to your players? Is it drawing it up, using video, all of the above? What resources have you found to be the best?
One in teaching that I've always thought was important was, excuse me, you teach static into chaos. So when you're laying out your system, let's say you're doing neutral zone forecheck, you can't go out there, throw the puck out, and just let them get into a live scrimmage in neutral zone forecheck. In my opinion, you go out and you go through routing drills. You say, okay, this one's D to D to post, and the neutral zone forecheck has to execute. And then you say, okay, this one's D to D to a high center, and the neutral zone forecheck has to execute. And then you say, this one's D to D to wide wing, and the neutral zone forecheck has to execute. And then after you teach static, then you can build into chaos of what the game is actually like and the fluidity of it. Then you do a neutral zone scrimmage. So I think static to chaos is extremely important way to coach. The other thing I'd say is offensively, you can do things 5-on-0. And I actually stole this from John Cooper, and he has said to me before, if you have the puck, it is 5-on-0. It doesn't matter who the opponents are. It is 5-on-0. You have the puck the whole time. So you can do things 5-on-0 in those situations. I would also say, as I said before, teaching video is great if you're using exact examples. So if you want to teach your systems, find great clips that show exactly how you want them to play. And that's not easy. Like, you're not going to find 1,000 of them. You're going to find a few. But make sure you have exact, and it doesn't need to be 10 of them. It could be 1. It could be 2. Whatever areas you're covering, make sure they're exact examples. And I think those reinforcement clips, as you see them doing it right, are as critical as any clips where you're showing them doing it wrong. And the thing about negative clips where they're doing it wrong is you better, again, don't make it, well, in this play I do this, but in this play I do this. Make it things that work towards your foundations and your beliefs, not on singular plays. I say all the time, don't teach plays. Teach the principles of how you want to play. Don't teach plays, teach principles.
Okay, awesome. Is there anything you haven't covered that you'd want to leave everyone watching with today?
No, I think coaching's a great livelihood. I've been really fortunate to be around some great coaches. Certainly some of the ones that are on this call today. I forgot to mention Scotty Owens' name earlier. He coached with in Des Moines after I was gone, but a huge impact on the USHL. I just think we got to help each other out, and we got to do what we can to really build our coaching profession, and it's critically important in the USHL. It's critically important in the NHL, and I've seen the benefits of it. Okay,
awesome. Everyone, there's a link there on your screen. Hopefully you found today's presentation from Blash useful, but we'd love your feedback so we can continue to improve it and enhance the program next season. Thanks for taking some time to join us. Blash, thank you so much for taking the time. We know it's busy, and we really do appreciate your time. So thanks, everyone, and have a great day.